What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another video. If you don't know who I am, that means you're new. I'm Mark. What's good with y'all? Go check out my other videos. Check them out. Check them out. But first, stay on this one. All right, so let's get into it. This video, the idea at least, was actually commented by one of y'all. It was commented on one of my recent videos. So, I read this comment and I was like, you know what? I definitely got to do a video on this. So, my opinions on mini slugs. Are they good for self-defense or home defense in this case? Because realistically speaking, you're not taking a shotgun really too far outside of your home unless you're doing something like hunting or it's an apocalyptic event. However, I will get into those as well. So let's get into it. So what are mini shells exactly? I'm going to talk about some of the pros and cons of them, and then I'm going to go ahead and discuss my opinions on them in the applicable self-defense situations. So, mini shells are 1 3/4 inches compared to 2 3/4 inch shells or 3-inch shells. Generally speaking, there are only a couple of brands that really make them, so they're not super common to find. Generally speaking, a couple of pros about them is that you do get a higher capacity in them. That's almost always a given on that. On top of the higher capacity, generally speaking, it has lower recoil. Now, of course, that changes with, certain specific, I guess, mini shell loads. Like excuse me, I've heard plenty of people sit there and say that, hey, I shot a 1-ounce slug out of this, and I really didn't notice too much of a difference in recoil from that in a regular 2 3/4 inch shell. But regardless, that's not my point I'm here to get into. Generally speaking, though, less recoil, as I said before, a higher capacity. Now, there are some cons to it that really stand out, and this is something that people need to be aware of, right? So, with less recoil, smaller shells means you're going to get less pellets, smaller pellets at that. Not to mention, it's not going to be as effective, ballistically speaking, when it comes to stopping the threat. Now, is that too big of a trade-off considering it is a shotgun round? In my opinion, yeah. The reason why that con is such a big deal is because of the fact that shotguns, you generally get them because, or not get them, but when you use them for home defense, you're wanting 1 or 2 rounds at most to be what stops the threat. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. Overall, it just seems like if you're not going to be getting as much oomph out of it, regardless of the capacity, that's a pretty big con. You see what I mean? Now, moving on just from that aspect alone, another big con, and this is something not a lot of people talk about, is they do have reliability issues. So generally speaking, they are often recommended to be put in breech loading shotguns, meaning like over under double barrel, side by side double barrel, whatever, single barrel shotgun, whatever. My whole point though is the reason why it is recommended is because with semi-autos, the chances of you, accurately them being fed, not happening pretty much. With pumps, you're worrying about if you hold the gun at an exact angle, you're worrying about, okay, well, when you rack the pump all the way back, sometimes the spent casing will get caught in there. It's generally speaking, it's not going to be as reliable as you would with your normal 2 3/4 inch shells. Now, of course, there are some guns, like for example, I believe it's a Mossberg 590S, that they are made to shoot 3-inch shells, 2 3/4 inch shells, mini shells, without an issue. So, of course, there are some ways around it. However, that's, few, that it's not a very common thing. Which brings up the question, how do some people, reliably shoot the mini shells themselves? Well, that all lies into the fact that you have to get an attachment for your shotgun to more reliably feed the mini shells. And if you want to shoot 2 3/4 inch shells again, you have to remove the attachment. So that, generally speaking, is a pretty big con, in my opinion, that you can't just reliably, run the ammo. But of course, it makes sense. In my in my opinion, it would be a similar a similar argument to, if you tried comparing like, oh yeah, well, why don't you just put 380 ACP in your 9mm? Like, yeah, sure, it'll fire probably once and then malfunction, So, I mean, I see the argument there. I see why that's such a big con as well. So taking these pros and cons into consideration, let's go ahead and move on from that. Now, I do want to point out one thing that I didn't mention too much when it came to the con of, ballistically speaking, them being obviously not as, I guess, efficient as, as one could say, not as efficient as 2 3/4 inch shells. Does that mean that they won't stop somebody? No, that's not what that means. And remember, I'm one of the people who will always tell you guys any gun is better than no gun. But I'm still taking that into, account when I'm doing my opinions on this. So moving on from that, let's go ahead and start with like a home defense situation. Generally speaking, in a home defense situation, depending where you're at, you're worrying about a couple of things. You're worrying about, one, not wanting to damage your property. Two, not wanting to hurt whoever else is in your home that isn't the threat. Like, for example, if you have kids, I don't know why I started with 2 fingers out when I said kids, but when you have, if like you have kids, a wife, animals, whatever, right? You don't want to worry about a lot of over-penetration. So would the mini shells be good for that? Yeah, sure, you can make that argument. However, some things that we've also found is that, if you at least do your own research on this, you'll find that the mini shells spread at a tiny bit higher rate than your standard 2 3/4 inch shells would. Now, generally speaking, buckshot spreads at about 1 inch per yard. Now, that's an okay, grouping. It's not the best. However, what I can say is that there is better ammo that, of course, will have, much tighter than 1 inch per yard. My point is simply, though, that while that is the case, the mini shells, I would argue it's maybe 1.5 inches per yard, maybe even 2. They have a good bit more spread to them, and some people would like to argue, oh, that's even better. That means you don't have to aim. Well, if any of y'all are arguing for not having to aim, that's kind of a big issue. But I'm getting off that topic because I've done a whole video debunking that really dumb idea. That's besides the point, though. I can tell my ADHD has been kicking in. I'm going off on rants here and there. Back to what I was saying, though, is with that larger spread, you're worrying about possibly hitting somebody that you don't want to. So just keep that in mind. You're worrying about not stopping somebody with, 1 or at most 2 rounds. However, you do have that higher capacity. Is that, generally speaking, a good enough trade-off, in my opinion? Would I argue, to use that for home defense, I guess you would say? Probably not. Once again, with a shotgun, you want to be able to stop somebody with 1 or 2 rounds. That's simply it. If you have to use more, then yeah, you want to be able to use more. That's why most shotguns, generally speaking, especially pump action shotguns or even most semi-auto shotguns nowadays, have a capacity of like 5 + 1 at least. So once again, it's not really a matter of, oh yeah, will this extra capacity or will this lower recoil really mean too much? As it doesn't really make too much of a difference, considering you're still not stopping somebody, right that second like you want. So overall, mini shells, I would argue, aren't the best when it came to a home defense situation. Now, what I will say is, moving on from that aspect of home defense simply, what would I rate it? Before I move on, I'll probably give it like a, good 6.5 out of 10. Once again, guys, I'm not saying mini shells can't be used for self-defense or that they can't be good for that. Or at least not that they can't be good for that. They're not really that good for that, or that they can't be used effectively against, in certain situations against certain, I guess, targets or threats, you could say. However, what I can say, though, is that it's not doing as good of a job as your standard 2 3/4 inch shell would. Now, moving on from that, right, let's talk about, SHTF, right? let's talk about an SHTF situation and why some people would argue that mini shells can be, pretty decent in a situation like that. So the pros of mini shells in a situation like, like Shit Hits a Fan is simply that, hey, while yes, it's not going to hit as hard, it is lighter, meaning I don't mean recoil wise, I mean the actual ammunition is lighter, so it's going to be easier to carry around. You can carry around more, and so there are some pros to it in a situation like that. I will say I'm pretty sure that mini shells would be phenomenal for hunting. I'm not trying to make any argument against that. However, once again, when you're worrying about issues of reliability is where I have a big issue with it. When you have to worry about adding attachments to, let's say, your pump action shotgun, so that way it can reliably feed mini shells, I have an issue with that, because if that attachment breaks, I mean, what are the chances of you finding another one? I'm not saying it's so low that it will never happen. However, it is still very low chances. So overall, in a Shit Hits a Fan situation, I would argue that mini shells might not be the best. Mini slugs I've actually seen, like legitimately good ballistics out of, in my opinion, too good, because overall with your standard, 2 3/4 inch shell slugs, it's the same weight slug anyways in the mini shells, 1 ounce. So, I mean, I'm getting off topic here. Overall, though, would I recommend those at least for home defense or any form of self-defense? Probably not, because you are worrying about over-penetration with that. It's weird because you would think with the mini shells, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about over-penetration at all. But a 1 ounce slug being shot through somebody is still a 1 ounce slug being shot through somebody. Just remember that, people. Now, moving on, right, I'm going to go ahead and give the score for an SHTF situation for mini slugs. I would also make, the same argument for, actually, I'd probably say like a 6. I wouldn't say a 6.5 this time. That 0.5 wasn't deserved. It was not. Once again, are mini shells bad for self-defense? Are they impossible to use for self-defense? No, I'm not saying that at all. But am I saying they're good for self-defense? Are they something I would go out of my way to want to have? No, probably not. Now, moving on from an SHTF situation, animal defense. This one, here's my problem, right? A lot of people go hunting with their shotguns, right? A lot of people have used shotguns, to defend themselves against animals. When you do that, it's the power behind the shotgun round is what's saving you. That, I don't know how anybody could make any other argument than simply that. It is the power of the round that is saving you. I have seen bears get hit in the face with 1 ounce slugs before. That's what stopped them. You know what I mean? It's the power behind the round that saves you. So to make an argument for an animal defense that a mini shell might be good isn't a very sound argument to me. Now, of course, for, small, medium-sized animals, mini shells will do mini shells will do the job just fine. As long as it's not mini bird shot, at least. But my whole point, though, is that, yeah, small, medium-sized animals, depending on your definition of medium-sized animals, it should do, an okay job. However, when you're getting into any larger-sized animals, I truthfully cannot recommend that to you, and in good conscience, at least, recommend that to you guys. Not in any way, shape, or form. While once again, it can possibly do the job with, certain larger animals, maybe, it's definitely not going to do the job with large animals that you probably are more likely than not to see. Like, for example, here's a perfect example, actually. What's one animal that and while technically different species of the animal, still the same, I guess, category of animal, and you'll see what I mean. It's one animal that is a predator to pretty much anything it wants to be, that you can find some of them here in Florida. You can find some in Alaska. You can find some in plenty of places. Keep in mind, I just named off two polar opposite places. God, I'm having a rough day, guys, as you can tell. What is that? Bears. Now, of course, down here in Florida, you're more worried about like the black bear and whatnot, you know. But my point is that generally speaking, with larger animals that are more likely than not to pose a threat to your life, mini shells aren't going to have enough oomph behind them. So while with some medium-sized animals and definitely smaller animals that may pose a threat to your life, sure, you know, those might be, you know, mini shells might come in handy. But all in all, it just doesn't really seem worth it to me because in the end, you don't know what kind of animal you're going to come across when you're, you know, worrying about being ready to protect yourself. I guess I would give the overall score for this probably a, I don't know what, I'll be nice and say a 5. You know, like you guys got to understand that 5 is really me being generous here. Once again, are mini shells bad for self-defense? Is it impossible to use them for self-defense? No, it's the same argument. I mean, not the exact same argument because, you know, mini shells do carry more oomph, but it's a similar argument that I would make for like 22 LR. You know, yeah, it can be used for self-defense. Is it the best? No, but it can be used, you know, but once again, you know, any gun is better than no gun. So that's how I view it. Overall, though, your final score, I guess, for mini shells is going to be a rough 6. I mean, it didn't do that great here, guys. But in the end, I feel like you guys already knew that was going to be the case here. But I think that about wraps it up for this video. I don't want to keep going in circles here. Y'all make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that bell. When you hit that bell, hit all. And whether or not you agree with me on my opinions on mini shells, if you do, comment down below. If you don't, comment down below. And why. I want to know why. But whether or not you agree with me, make sure to check out all my other videos. Y'all make sure to stay legal, stay safe, stay dangerous. Have a good one, y'all. Peace.